I am Emily Harper, still 34 years old, standing quietly in a hidden corner of the splendid wedding hall of my sister Lauren, whom I have not seen for 12 long years. Not a single message, not a single inquiry. My heart aches with each beat as familiar faces pass by, people who were once attached to my childhood, but now no one bothers to look back to recognize who I am. Lauren, in her pure white wedding dress, radiant among the congratulatory arms of the guests, completely unaware of why I am actually here today. On the podium, my father, Mr. Robert Harper, loudly praised Lauren as the only light of the family, as if I had never been born into this world. In my hand, a dark blue envelope, a small piece of paper containing secrets enough to suffocate the family picture they have tried so hard to paint for so many years. When the MC announced it was time for the congratulatory speech, I took a deep, choking breath, then walked slowly toward the bright lights. If you're listening to this story or watching the video I shared and have ever felt betrayed by the people you love most, I want you to know you're not alone. My family's story may sound like a dark drama, but the truth is, buried secrets have a way of surfacing at the most unexpected times. I'm curious, where are you as you read this? Share the city or country where you live. And if my story touches your heart, don't forget to follow me as I continue my journey to uncover the truth and reclaim forgotten justice. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. I grew up in Westport, Massachusetts, in an upscale neighborhood where perfectly manicured lawns were a testament to the immaculate lives everyone proudly displayed. Our 7-bedroom Victorian home, with its outdoor pool and blooming rose garden, always made neighbors gasp as if we had stepped out of the pages of a high society magazine. My father, Charles Harper, was a prominent internist at Newton Community Hospital, a man well respected in the medical community. My mother, Margaret, was the epitome of a model lady. Lavish charity parties, expensive golf club memberships, and meticulous attention to detail. My younger sister, Lauren, 4 years younger than me, was someone I held and loved from my earliest memories. I sang her lullabies every night before bed, brushed her silky hair every morning before school, and shielded her from the teasing at Oakwood Academy. We whispered secrets under the flashlights under the covers, vowing to never be absent from each other's important moments. On stormy nights, when the thunder made Lauren cower in fear, she would crawl quietly into my bed, and I would hold her tight until her breathing calmed in peaceful sleep. "Emmy," she whispered, "I promise we'll always be sisters, no matter what, okay?" "I promise, Lolo," I whispered back, calling her by the intimate name only we knew. I believed nothing in the world could tear us apart. Behind the glamorous facade of my family were dark secrets that we were absolutely not allowed to reveal. The night shifts that my father used as an excuse to leave the house were actually just cleverly staged plays, covering up illicit relationships with colleagues and women working in the medical equipment industry. I discovered this when I was 15 years old. During a sleepless night, I overheard him whispering on the phone in a strangely gentle voice, a tone I had never heard him use with my mother. When I mustered up the courage to ask him directly, he gave me a slap like a thunderbolt, the first time he had ever done anything to me. "Never mention this again, especially to your mother," he said, his eyes as sharp as a knife piercing straight into me. "Adult matters, not your business." My mother, though she did not say it, was certainly not in the dark. She chose to bury everything in the bottom of a glass of fine gin, cleverly hidden in the bottles of Chanel perfume neatly arranged on her dressing table. Most days by midday, her voice would begin to dream. Her walk would slow like a stage performer. I would often find her dozing on the porch chair, using exhaustion as an excuse to avoid dinner, where silence reigned amid silver plates and perfectly folded napkins. As teenagers, Lauren and I responded to the oppressive atmosphere in our family in very different ways. I became reckless and rebellious, constantly testing boundaries, painting my nails black, sneaking out after curfew, and exposing the lies my father tried to hide behind his mask of sanctimony. Lauren, on the other hand, chose a path of perfection. She became the head of the school events committee, participated in community projects to enhance her college resume, and carefully crafted a social media image that was as glamorous as a postcard angel. "Why do you have to screw everything up?" Lauren would blurt out after a heated argument with my dad. "Just do what he says, and everything will be so much easier." Because it's all a facade, I snapped. Don't you see that this family is rotten on the inside? But Lauren didn't want to believe it. I lived to hear my father's praise, and I only received cold, contemptuous looks. At parties and celebrations, he always introduced me with a proud, sparkling voice. She is my pride and joy. Then turned to me and said like a breeze, and this is Emily. It all started to fall apart on my 18th birthday. My father, Charles Harper, threw a lavish party at the local golf club, not to please me, but to preserve the Harper family's aura. During the party, I caught his eyes lingering too long on Olivia, a 24-year-old event planner with her calm smile and tight ivory dress. When I turned to the serving area to get more juice, the sight of them hugging in the shadow of the lobby stabbed into my memory like a knife. Something inside me snapped, silently and decisively. I returned to the banquet room, where more than 20 guests, friends, relatives, my parents' business associates, were leisurely enjoying dessert. I picked up a crystal goblet and tapped it to get their attention. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I would like to raise a glass to my father, a man who is not only devoted to his family name and his medical career, but also to Olivia, who organized this party." The room froze. My mother, Margaret, was ashen-faced. Lauren looked as if she had been pulled from a dream, her eyes brimming with tears. My father went from shock to outrage in a matter of seconds. "Emily has clearly had too much to drink," he said, his voice strained but soothing, forcing a smile. "Olivia is just a staff member. This is the end of the party." In less than 20 minutes, the guests were sent away with apologies and gift bags as if nothing had happened. Back home, my father exploded in the cold granite kitchen. "You ungrateful bastard," he roared, pacing like a wounded animal. "Do you know what you've just ruined? These people are investors, colleagues, the face of the hospital." "Good," I replied, looking straight ahead. "They should know who you are. And me. What am I to you?" He laughed, dry and cruel. "I gave you everything. A house, a school, clothes, and all you've brought is trouble." My mother sat motionless at the kitchen counter, her eyes fixed on her wineglass as if it were her only escape. Lauren stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Emmy, why did you do this?" she whispered. "You ruined everything." It was then that I realized I was completely alone among people with the same last name. "Get out of this house," my father said, his voice suddenly low and cold as steel. "You have two choices. Keep quiet, apologize publicly, and live by the rules, or leave forever." I looked at my mother, waiting for a response, a nod, but she avoided my gaze. I turned to Lauren. "Lolo, I know you're not lying." She shook her head, her lips trembling. "You just want attention, even if it hurts everyone." The words hurt more than the slap. "Okay," I said, my voice choking. "I'll go." I gathered my clothes, a few belongings, and some frayed photos into a backpack, as if packing away a life I had rejected. My father stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes cold. "Credit cards canceled," he said. "Car in my name, keys left." He pulled out $400 bills and handed them to me. "More generous than you deserve. Don't contact me. Don't come back. You don't exist to me." I walked through the door on a cold October night, 18 years old, with $400 and a backpack. No one came running. The first 12 months were the cruelest of my life. When I was lucky, I found a place to sleep in crowded shelters. When I was not, I took refuge on friends' couches, until their parents' concerned eyes told me that my presence was no longer welcome. I took any job I could get my hands on. Working the counter at a convenience store, cleaning the stockroom all night, or working as a line cook in a small diner that smelled of frying oil. I showered at a public gym, where I scrubbed toilet floors in exchange for a few minutes standing under the hot water. I soon learned that a cheap cup of tea at a fast food joint could buy hours of unquestioned warmth. The public library became my daytime sanctuary, a place where I could be alone, where I could exist without being looked at suspiciously. No phone calls, no texts, no emails from my family. To them, Emily Harper seemed to have disappeared from the world since her 18th birthday. The bottom came in my 7th month, when I was fired from my job at the convenience store for falling asleep after a sleepless night. Shivering in a corner of the bus stop, clutching my last few belongings as if they were all I had left, I vowed silently I would not just survive. I would rise, I would rise. And one day, my own father would regret pushing me into the darkness. The next morning, I walked onto the campus of Springfield Community College in Massachusetts, carrying a faint hope that education might be the key to a way out. I had excelled in high school and had been awarded several small scholarships and special needs financial aid. I rented a cramped room in an old wooden house, sharing the living space with 3 other students, and juggled 3 jobs, making coffee in the early mornings, assisting the librarian at lunchtime, and bussing tables at a local diner on weekends. My schedule was a never-ending machine. Study from 7 a.m. to 1 p.m., work until 11 p.m. Essay review until 2 a.m., take a few hours of sleep, and start again. I lived on cheap sandwiches and cafeteria leftovers, wore clothes from charity shops, cut my own hair with borrowed scissors. But for the first time, I felt like I was being true to myself, no longer bound by anyone's stereotypes and expectations. In my 2nd semester, I enrolled in an introductory law class taught by Professor Susan Carter, who became a role model for me. Smart, calm, and exuded effortless authority. After I aced my first test, she pulled me aside after class. "Emily, you have a sharp mind," she said, looking at me through her thin glasses. "But you look exhausted. Are you okay?" The question touched a soft spot in me that I tried to hide. I opened up and told her everything. My family disowned me. The long nights without a home. The months of struggling to survive. She didn't show pity, just listened quietly. Her eyes filled with understanding. Then she recounted her own journey. Her wanderings in her 20s, her self-doubts. "I didn't have an easy start," she said. "But now I'm a professor, an author, and a consultant on major lawsuits." She became the mother figure I'd always wanted. Non-judgmental, non-committal, and always believing in me. She helped me apply for more scholarships, invited me to dinner when I missed a meal, and reminded me of my potential. "You have a fire in your heart," she would say. "Don't let it burn out. Use it to go far." Under her guidance, I graduated with honors, completed my basic paralegal degree, and got a job at a small law firm while I prepared to apply to law school. When the acceptance letter from Yale arrived with a partial scholarship, she not only coached me through my loans, but also co-signed a financial agreement that made me eligible for admission. "Just give back by helping others," she said. That was it. Law school was a double whammy, more academically demanding than community college, but also easier in other ways, with a stable home, regular meals, and the constant encouragement of Professor Susan Carter. I threw myself into my studies like a thirsty man in a desert, excelling in courses related to financial law and healthcare regulation. The complexities of financial fraud, health insurance law, and medical malpractice didn't discourage me. In fact, they fascinated me. After graduation, I joined Carter, Wells & Associates, a prestigious Boston law firm specializing in corporate law and financial crime. Like many new hires, I started with the basics, working up to 70 hours a week, poring over thick files and assisting senior partners on major cases. But I never did it just to get by. I did it to excel. I volunteered for the most difficult cases, was the last one to leave the office, and always left my mark with uncompromising dedication. By my 4th year, I was promoted to partner, the youngest person in the firm's history to that position. I lived in a modern apartment in Cambridge, owned a wardrobe full of tailored suits, and earned the genuine respect of my colleagues and superiors. I had gone from a girl who had cowered on a bus stop bench in the middle of the night to a successful lawyer, replacing the fear and darkness of my past with confidence, self-esteem, and control of my life. A life-changing case was suddenly handed to me. "Emily, we need you to handle Northeast Medical," lead attorney Michael Wells said, placing a heavy stack of papers on the table. "There's insurance fraud, unnecessary procedures, and questionable billing from medical providers. You're in charge." I nodded, opening the file. "Who's the main guy?" "The chief of internal medicine, Dr. Charles Harper," he said. He turned the program into the biggest moneymaker in the area. But inside sources say he's been falsifying records, manipulating records, and performing unnecessary procedures for years. My hand dropped, and the papers slid to the floor, scattering across the carpet. "Are you okay?" Michael asked, bending down to help pick them up. "Fine," I said, my voice shaking. "Just surprised. I've heard of his reputation." "That reputation could have been built on fraud," he said. "His records show he was performing procedures at twice the national average. Many were unnecessary. We need a solid record before we send it to the FBI." That evening, I sat motionless, my eyes glued to my father's file photo. He had aged, his hair was more streaked with gray, but the smile that had charmed crowds was still there. The files revealed that he had expanded his practice, bought a mansion on Cape Cod, and had doubled his fortune since I left home. All of it could have been built on deception, taking advantage of the most vulnerable patients. My professional instincts told me to back down because of the conflict of interest, but a quiet thought overcame me. Who knew Charles Harper better than the daughter he had abandoned? I knew his cover-up, the arrogant confidence with which he had deflected any questions. For the next 5 months, I quietly led the investigation, keeping my personal relationship hidden. I interviewed former patients, clinic staff, accountants, and financial experts. I combed through thousands of medical records, looking for suspicious patterns of repeated procedures. I traced money from device companies to secret accounts. The picture emerged clear and indisputable. My father had enriched himself by performing unnecessary medical procedures, falsifying test results to legitimize his billing, pushing costs onto insurance, and collecting kickbacks from providers. Most horrifying of all, some patients suffered serious complications, even died from unnecessary interventions. When the investigation was almost complete, a white envelope appeared on my desk, unlike any other I had ever received. Inside was an elaborate wedding invitation, embossed with the names of the bride and groom, Lauren Harper and David Thornton, the son of a Massachusetts state senator. The ceremony would be held at the Coastal Golf Club, where I had first exposed my father's wrongdoings 12 years earlier. Attached was a small handwritten note in familiar handwriting. "Emmy, I know we've been apart, but I want you to be there for this important day. Please come, Lauren." I sat silently for hours, my eyes glued to the invitation, my mind racing. How had they tracked me down? And more importantly, why now? Was this a sincere invitation from my sister seeking reconciliation, or a calculated move by the Thorntons, who didn't want their family history to tarnish their political reputations? Or was there something deeper at play? The timing was ironic. Just days before I was due to hand over the file that would completely destroy my father's reputation. The card sat motionless on the kitchen table for 4 days. I looked at it every morning while I waited for my tea to boil, and the memories flooded back. Lauren's cold stare calling me selfish, my father's emphatic declaration that I was erased from the family, and my mother's helpless silence, a silent verdict. How had they found me? I had used the professional name Emily H. Lawson, deliberately omitted the last name Harper, kept my address private, and completely avoided any trace of social media. On Thursday morning, I picked up the phone and called Professor Susan Carter. "Susan, I need some advice," I said when she picked up. "Something really disturbing has happened." We arranged to meet at a modest diner in suburban Boston, where the clink of spoons against china cups sounded like a soft tap to my heart. I placed the wedding invitation in front of her and slowly told her about the investigation and the blood ties that complicated it all. "This is a difficult ethical dilemma," she said after a pause, her eyes fixed on the prominent name printed on the invitation. "As a matter of professional principle, I should have backed out as soon as I found out my father was involved." I nodded, the old feeling of shame spreading in my chest. "I know," I said quietly. "But the investigation is over now," she added, setting the invitation down. "And the evidence is strong enough to stand no matter who's pursuing it. The question now is, why did they send this invitation? After 12 years of silence?" Susan sipped her Earl Grey tea, her eyes on the frosted glass window. Perhaps Lauren genuinely wanted to reconnect. Or perhaps her father was afraid of the consequences and wanted to do damage control. Or since the Thorntons needed to verify the Harper family history before they officially connected. I lay awake that night. Old images came back to me like a shaky film. Lauren and I laughing on a Nantucket beach, building sandcastles hand in hand. My father teaching me to swim, his arms holding me in the cold water until I could stand on my own. My mother gently tying my hair every morning, singing an old song whose name I no longer remembered. But in between the tenderness were slices, coldness, betrayal, and silence that lasted for more than a decade. I dreamed of walking into a wedding. My father was stunned as if he had seen a ghost. My mother had dropped her glass on the tile floor, and Lauren was crying, her makeup smudged with tears. I woke up with a start, sweat soaking my shirt, my heart pounding. For the next week, I was torn between three paths: ignore the invitation and devote myself to the case, attend the wedding in silence, hoping for a chance to heal without having to give up my principles, or take the most dangerous path, exposing the whole truth to them in front of hundreds of witnesses. I decided to make an appointment with my longtime therapist, Dr. Clara Evans, who had accompanied me through the depths of trauma and inner restructuring over the years. "What do you hope for if you decide to go there?" she asked, her eyes fixed on me, not judging, just listening. "I think closure," I said immediately and then fell silent. "No, not really. I want justice. I want them to see who I've become without them. And maybe a little part of me just wants them to hurt like I hurt." "That's a natural reaction for a person who's been hurt," she said softly. "The question is, if you let it, will you get relief? Or just another cycle of pain?" After a long night of tossing and turning, I made my decision. I would attend the wedding, not to reconcile, but to confront the truth. I wanted to lift the veil of lies that had surrounded the Harper family for decades. I would bring a bundle of evidence, but whether or not I would make it public would depend on how things played out that day. The very next morning, I contacted FBI agent Karen Ellis, who had worked with me on many complex financial cases. "I need to talk about Charles Harper," I told her when I met her at the federal office in downtown Boston. "There's something I haven't told you." I told her everything: my blood relationship to him, why I hadn't recused myself from the investigation, and the wedding invitation from Lauren. Karen kept her cool, but her eyes grew tense. "This could throw the whole thing into disarray," she said. "The defense will cling to a personal relationship to deny your professional motives." "The evidence is overwhelming," I replied. "It's independent, backed up by multiple sources. The fact that I'm his daughter doesn't change the facts." After a tense exchange, we came to a compromise. The FBI would proceed without any data directly implicating me. I would attend the wedding as Emily Harper, not a lawyer, not an investigator, but a returned exile. If I chose to reveal anything to my family, that was my personal choice. But any statement that might affect the proceedings would be weighed carefully. "In a few weeks, we'll have enough to get an arrest warrant," Karen said as she walked me to the door. "Whatever you decide that day, justice will find its way." Once the decision was made, I began to prepare with meticulous attention to detail. I chose a navy dress from Nordstrom, classic, well-cut, modest enough not to stand out, but still projecting a sense of stability and independence. I scheduled hair, nails, and light makeup at my regular salon, not to impress, but to feel in control of this chaotic trajectory. I booked a room at the Seaside Hotel, 2 miles from the Coastal Golf Club, close enough to be convenient, far enough to maintain a safe physical and emotional distance. Because caution was ingrained in me, I shared my plans with Professor Susan Carter and her assistant Rachel. "If you don't hear from me by Saturday night, call this number," I instructed, giving them the contact information for Special Agent Karen Ellis, the only person I could trust to intervene if things got out of hand. The night before my departure, I sat alone in my small apartment, surrounded by documents, depositions, and old family photos that had faded with age. I carefully selected the key pieces of evidence, the pages that could destroy the flawless image my father had worked so hard to create, and put them in a brown envelope, sealing it tightly with tape. The contents were enough to expose the truth without disrupting the FBI's investigation. As I zipped up my suitcase, the phone rang, an unfamiliar number from Massachusetts. I hesitated for a moment, then pressed the answer button. "Hello," I said, wary. "Emmy, it's Lauren." My sister's voice, deeper, more seasoned, still made my heart sink. "I just wanted to make sure you got the invitation," she said after a brief pause. "And I really hope you come." "I will," I said, my voice echoing from the depths of memory. "That's great," Lauren breathed, as if relieved. "I have a lot to say. We need some time." "Yeah, sure," I said, my eyes still on the envelope sitting on the table. She was silent for a moment, then whispered, "Emmy, thank you." Just after the call ended, I sat motionless, clutching the phone. A tear fell onto the back of my hand. Then another. For the first time, the thought crept into my mind. Was I entering a crossroads from which there was no turning back? The next morning, I set off for Massachusetts, each mile bringing back a memory buried deep in my memory. I checked into the seaside hotel under the name Emily Lawson, not ready to face the Harpers, at least not until the time was right. As night fell, I drove past the old house, a place of memories, now a different owner, its windows lit but no eyes waiting for me. I continued driving, stopping near the fancy restaurant where the family had hosted a dinner party before Lauren's wedding. I parked the car on the side of the road, sitting in the dark, quietly watching through the glass. Inside, my family was chatting and laughing. My father, Charles, was elegant in his gray suit. My mother, Margaret, elegant but tired. Lauren was radiant in a simple white dress, standing next to her fiancé, David, so calm, confident, so proper it was almost unreal. They looked like a model family, harmonious, cozy, perfect to the point of admiration. I wondered, how much was unspoken behind those staged smiles? What were the Thorntons trying to hide beneath their flawless exterior? When I returned to the hotel, I walked into my room with my mind like a stage set full of scripts. I replayed the words I might say tomorrow, each possibility, each reaction, playing out in a chaotic sequence. Near midnight, I sat by the window, the streetlights dimming the curtains, unsure how I would act in front of the people who had erased me from their lives without hesitation. But I knew one thing: I would not remain silent. 12 years ago, I left as an abandoned child, with only $400 in my pocket and a backpack full of hurt. Tomorrow, I'll be back as Emily Harper Lawson, partner attorney, investigator, and bearer of truth that can rip apart the mask of power my father has maintained for years. I woke at dawn, my heart pounding like it was going to rip out of my chest. The wedding was supposed to start at 3 in the afternoon, but anxiety had woken me up before it was dark, and I was wandering around the seaside hotel, my heart pounding. I called room service, but all I could manage was a cold croissant, the taste like a fragment of a lost memory. Twice, my hand trembled as I reached for the phone, almost dialing Professor Susan Carter to confess that I was about to give up, that I couldn't bring myself to do this. By 10 o'clock, I forced myself to get ready, a slow, deliberate series of actions, as if each coat of powder, each brush of hair could calm the storm within. I pulled my hair into an elegant bun, dusted a light layer of powder over my pale skin, accentuating my deep brown eyes. Eyes my mother had once said could see through a person's heart. I slipped on the navy blue dress I'd picked out, formidable enough to keep my distance, confident enough to make my presence known. Reflected in the mirror was a grown woman, calm, decisive, with almost no trace of the rebellious girl who had left that house 12 years ago. But even when I close my eyes, I can still feel her presence. The 18-year-old girl, her hand shaking on the doorknob, walking out of the place she once called home, not knowing where she was going, only that she couldn't stay. "I can do this," I whispered to my reflection in the mirror, like a curse turned into a promise. "I've survived worse things than this." But as soon as I picked up my bag and the brown envelope containing the documents, the truths that had never been revealed, panic surged through me like a tidal wave. My chest tightened, my breaths coming in short, sharp gasps, caught in my throat. I sank to the floor, tears streaming down my lashes, smearing mascara along my carefully painted face. For 10 long, sleepwalking minutes, I tried to use every technique Dr. Clara Evans had taught me. Slow, deep breaths, regular exhalations, relaxing each tense muscle group, reminding myself that I was in the present, that there was no immediate danger. When the wave of rage receded, leaving me exhausted but more grounded, I adjusted my makeup, took a deep breath, and hailed a cab. Coastal Golf Club, I told the driver, my voice sounding calm, though inside I was still churning like an undercurrent. The venue was exactly as I remembered it, a manicured lawn stretching all the way to the edge of the Massachusetts Bay. White columns dotted the entrance, white flower arrangements towered above the children's heads, and a light scent hung in the air like a veil. Guests in elegant attire, summer suits, floral dresses, strolled through the gates, greeted by a receptionist with a list in hand. Your name? A young woman with a tablet asked politely. Emily Harper, I replied, the name coming out like an echo from the distant past. I had been used to Emily Lawson for so long. The girl paused for a moment, then smiled. Miss Harper, you're on the special list. An older woman approached, wearing a cream-colored suit and a small daisy pinned to her left breast. I'm Clara, the wedding coordinator. The bride left a note for me to meet you when you arrive. She smiled kindly, but there was an undisguised curiosity in her eyes. Would you like to see the bride before the ceremony? She's upstairs. No, I said, quicker than I intended, harder than I wanted. I'll find a seat. You're at table number 2, the family table, for the reception. Where would you like to sit for the wedding? With your family in front or in the back? The back row, near the aisle, I said, not hesitating to let slip that I was keeping an escape route. Clara nodded slightly, then led me down the gravel path between the blooming flower beds, toward the rows of white wooden chairs that had been neatly arranged back to the wedding venue. I took a seat at the end of the row, close to the exit, my heart still pounding, but my feet on the ground. And here I was. As the garden filled with laughter and footsteps, I sat quietly in the back row, trying to make myself invisible in the dazzling scene. The faces that had once been familiar were different. Gray hair, tired eyes, and slow steps, as if time had left its mark on the lives I had once been a part of. The parents of my old classmates fumbled through the seating list, whispering about times and protocol. My father's colleagues, confident in their well-tailored suits, stood next to their wives, clutching designer handbags as tacit symbols of luxurious power. Councilman Thornton, my father, and his wife greeted guests with friendly smiles practiced to perfection. Emily Harper! I turned around, startled. Aunt Margaret, my mother's sister, was staring at me, her eyes wide with shock. Is it really you? No one thought you'd come. She hugged me, an awkward brief hug, as if afraid I'd disappear if she held me too long. You look different, more mature. 12 years can change a person's life, I replied, forcing a polite smile. Yeah, that's right. Her voice trailed off, lost as if groping between two worlds, one filled with memories, the other with a complicated reality. It's sad what happened. Your mother, poor her, but it's over now. The important thing is that the family stays together. Before I could respond, her husband called out to her, waving his hand as if to rescue her from the awkward conversation. Before I left, I heard her whisper to a nearby guest. There, that girl who ran away. The one who always caused trouble. The word troublemaker cut me like a knife. Not loudly, but with a lingering sting. It repeated the story they had been weaving behind my back for years. A twisted version where I was labeled unstable instead of seen as someone who dared to speak up amid the lies. I quietly made my way to the ladies' lounge at the Coastal Golf Club, longing for some space away from the glittering faces and formulaic greetings. In the cool, granite-tiled room, I bent down to scoop water up my neck, feeling a refreshing sensation run down my spine, a relaxation trick Professor Susan Carter had taught me during my stressful days in law school. The door swung open. In the mirror, I saw my mother, Margaret Harper, appear like an old shadow. She paused, her hand still gripping the handle, her eyes stunned. She looked much older. Her figure was gaunt, her skin pale, her once blonde hair now a sad silver. In just a few breaths, she regained her usual noble demeanor, as if there had never been a breakup between us. "Emily, you're here," she said, walking slowly toward me, as if fearing a cold turn away. "Lauren will be delighted." "Really?" I turned to face her. Or is this all part of the Harper's whole show, to avoid awkward questions from outsiders? "That's not fair," she whispered, glancing quickly toward the hallway. "Honey, I know the past is rough, but this is your sister's wedding day. Please don't make a scene." Noisy. The word rang like an old bell from childhood, where all pain had to be wrapped in silence and dignity. "I didn't come to cause trouble," I said, my voice even, without a hint of climax. "I came because Lauren wanted me to." She nodded, relieved. "You look healthy and successful," she observed, her eyes sweeping over my elegant navy dress, my neatly braided hair, and my steady posture, as if trying to recognize the abandoned daughter in the grown woman before her. "What are you doing now?" "Associate at Carter, Wells and Associates, Boston." A glint of light flickered in her eyes, something like pride, but it quickly gave way to confusion. "Your father will be surprised to see you." "I'm sure he will," I said, my voice as sharp as a velvet knife. She paused. A brief moment, but long enough for me to see the faint fear in her eyes. A guest entered, disturbing the delicate rhythm between us. "See you at the reception," she said quickly, squeezing my hand, just enough to avoid being cold, and then turning away as if fleeing. I stood in the now empty room, my heart wavering. I had prepared myself for a cold or angry encounter, but what I encountered was a strange mix of politeness, tension, and quiet anxiety. She looked weaker than I had expected, not just with the passage of time, but with a profound fragility, as if she herself were struggling between nameless fragments. I walked towards the room that had the sign Lauren's Happy Day. The gold letters curled like soft calligraphy, framed by tiny flowers and delicate cream ribbons. I knocked hesitantly, my hand shaking slightly, my heart pounding as if I was about to enter a nameless memory. "Come in!" A clear, joyful voice rang out from inside. When the door opened, the first thing I saw was Lauren in her pure white wedding dress, surrounded by unfamiliar bridesmaids. She turned her head and her eyes widened when she saw me. The glass of juice in her hand stopped mid-flow, shaking slightly. "Emmy," she whispered, as if my name were something sacred. "You really came." The room suddenly became quiet. The bridesmaids, sensing something unusual in the air, hastily found excuses to retreat, checking their bouquets, checking their chairs, and then disappeared one by one, leaving the room silent and bathed in a soft light like morning dew. Lauren looked radiant. Her brown hair was pulled back into a delicate bun, a few curls falling lightly on her cheeks, her silk dress hugging her slim figure, highlighting her gentle and mature beauty. At 30, Lauren was no longer the slender girl she had been. She was now a fully grown woman, attractive and charming. "I almost didn't come," I said, my voice soft as if afraid to break the fragile atmosphere that had formed. Lauren set her cup down and walked slowly toward me, as if I were a mirage she feared would disappear if she walked too fast. "I don't blame you," she whispered, her voice soft and full of emotion. I looked into her eyes. "Then why invite you, Lauren? After 12 years of silence, not a word? Not a single contact?" She gestured for me to sit on the silk chair by the window, then gently adjusted her skirt before sitting beside me. Her eyes scanned my face as if searching for a long-lost sister. "I wasn't the one who was silent," she began, her voice shaking a little. "My freshman year, I hired someone to find you, using all my college savings. But Dad found out. He threatened to cut off all support if I didn't stop." I frowned, still not entirely convinced. "But I never got a call or an email." "I sent letters to your friend Sarah's old address. All 3 were returned. I even looked you up on social media, but all your accounts were gone." I nodded, averting my eyes. "I've erased all traces of my past." Lauren crossed her arms, her eyes pensive. Actually, I'm marrying into a political family, the Thorntons. David and I want to start our lives in the open, with nothing to hide. But the rift between you and me, I can't keep pretending it never existed. It's a rift that I've always felt guilty about. I looked at her, my voice suddenly sharp. So this is all to keep the Thorntons looking good? Lauren shook her head, her eyes sad. No, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I invited you because you're my sister, because I wanted you to be part of this new chapter of my life. I regret what happened between us. I want to make it right. Before Mom. Her voice broke. I held my breath, waiting for what was to come. Mom has cancer, she said softly. Terminal. The news was like a knife stabbing straight into my chest. I thought I had become numb, but my heart still ached. Despite years of resentment, she had still hugged me on rainy nights, taught me how to write my first letters, and had given me gentle glances after a drunken stupor. I'm sorry, I whispered, my emotions breaking out into words. How much longer? Maybe a few months, Lauren replied, her eyes never leaving mine. She wants to make it to the wedding. It's the only thing she's talked about lately. She paused, then asked, as if gently reproaching, You really don't know anything about your family? I shrugged, trying to keep my cool. You don't send me a monthly newsletter, I said, my voice unintentionally sarcastic. A knock on the door interrupted. 3 minutes, the organizer called. Lauren quickly stood up, adjusting her dress, trying to keep her face calm. Will you stay? She asked, her eyes hopeful. We'll talk after the ceremony. I could only nod, my throat tight. Thank you for coming, she whispered, squeezing my hand with her cold ones. It really means a lot to me. As I left the room, I was filled with a mixture of warm and painful emotions. Lauren was genuinely happy to see me again, which shook the belief I had held onto for so long, that I had been mercilessly abandoned by my family. And then, the news of my mother's illness. It was like a deep cut into the stable orbit I thought I had built, making everything more fragile and confusing than ever. I was lost in my thoughts when I almost bumped into my father around the corner of the hallway. Charles Harper, his silver hair meticulously combed, his charcoal gray suit hugging his tall, lean frame, looked older but still had the same commanding presence, as if time had only whittled his hair, but not his steel. When he saw me, his face shook, from surprise to tension, then back to composure. Emily, he said, his voice cool but controlled. What are you doing here? I was invited, I said, my voice as light as the wind on water. Lauren wanted me here. His fingers tightened into fists, his cheeks tightened. This is her big day, not mine. His eyes darted around as if to make sure no one else was witnessing the scene any longer than necessary. This is private. There's nothing more to say, I interrupted. I'm just here for the wedding and the reception. I'll leave tomorrow. Why now? He demanded, his voice thick with unspoken words. After 12 years of absence, you're suddenly thinking about your family? Perhaps you're just curious to know who Lauren's marrying, I said, deliberately keeping my voice distant. The Thorntons, after all, are a political force to be reckoned with. At the mention of the name, his eyes twitched, a flicker of concern that was quickly covered by a hard expression. Whatever you're up to, stop it, he said quietly, his voice full of warning. This day is bigger than any of us. Bigger than the family, you mean? I said, raising my eyebrows. He leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. How did you get in? Your name wasn't on the list I approved. So you were going to stop me, I said, a cold amusement in my eyes. Lauren clearly asked for her sister. You can't stop her. Outside in the garden, the wedding music began, the symphony that signaled the start of the ceremony. The sound of hurried footsteps reached Edward Langston, Dad's longtime lawyer. Charles, it's time to walk Lauren down the aisle. His eyes flicked to me, then paused. This is Emily, your daughter? Dad nodded stiffly, as if admitting something he didn't want to. She'll be leaving soon. Actually, I'll be staying at the reception, I corrected him, making sure to enunciate each word. Table 2, the family table. Dad's face paled slightly, the tension on his forehead unmistakable. He exchanged a quick glance with Langston, worried, urgent. Finally, he turned to me, his face as cold as ice. This isn't over. As he turned to walk away to fulfill his role as father of the bride, I stood there, watching silently. He bowed his head and whispered something to Langston, who nodded, his expression darkening. They were worried by my presence, and they had reason to be. I've seen families build castles of lies, shiny walls that conceal layers of secrets, locking out anyone who tries to find a way out. Sitting here, silently watching Lauren take her vows with her husband from the powerful Thornton family, I wonder, how many of you have faced a moment when betrayal by your own flesh and blood can no longer be denied? If this story resonates with you, share it, so those who are drowning in silence can find their voice. The ceremony is almost over, and the table outside is waiting for toasts and false glances, where I will have to face the people who have written me off as if I never existed. Come with me. The confrontation you've been waiting for is coming. The wedding ceremony is like a play, carefully choreographed down to the last detail. Lauren walked beside her father, her eyes shining as she exchanged vows with David, who looked at her with such tenderness and reverence that the room fell silent for a moment. My father, Charles Harper, played the role of father figure so smoothly that the family rifts never existed. His speech about tradition, duty, and loyalty was greeted with solemn nods, as if everyone agreed with what he said. My mother, Margaret, sat silently in the pews, dabbing her eyes with an intricately embroidered silk handkerchief, as if she were touched by something pure and sacred. In the front row, Councilman Thornton smiled contentedly, his eyes sparkling with pride at the alliance between a long-standing political family and a distinguished medical family. Only I knew it was all a polished facade. As the ceremony moved into the reception, I crouched in the shadows of the terrace, quietly watching the guests sipping wine and exchanging lively stories. Occasionally, I caught my father's eyes furtively glancing in my direction while he was chatting with Edward Langston, his personal lawyer. There was a moment when my mother seemed to turn to look at me, but her eyes quietly averted, as if she didn't have the courage to face her own flesh and blood. The dinner began in the candlelit and crystal-lit banquet hall. According to the seating chart, I was assigned to table number 2, which was reserved for those closest to me. My parents, the Thorntons, and David's younger brother. The atmosphere was tense under the veneer of politeness, and the pleasantries rang out, but lacked the warmth of sincerity. "So you're Emily," Councilman Thornton said, his voice deep and weighty. "Lauren says you practice law in Boston. That sounds impressive." "Thank you," I said, keeping my voice even. "I specialize in financial law." I saw my father pause, his hand holding his wine glass hovering in midair. "A challenging field," Thornton continued, oblivious to my father's change of expression. "Any cases you can share, within reason?" "I just closed a healthcare fraud investigation," I said slowly, looking straight at him. "A prominent doctor performed unnecessary procedures, filed false insurance claims, and took kickbacks from pharmaceutical companies, greed masquerading as medical ethics." My father stilled. His knuckles were white as he gripped his wineglass, as if letting go would shatter the whole thing. My mother frowned, her eyes lost, as if trying to understand or try to forget what she had just heard. "Your job is noble," Mrs. Thornton interjected gently, breaking the quiet heaviness. "Protecting the vulnerable is not something everyone has the courage to do." "Yes, I think so," I replied, my lips pursed slightly. No one should be allowed to profit from the pain of others. Before the meal could continue, the host stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand, announcing the speeches. The conversation was cut short, but the echoes lingered. A quiet echo in the chests of those who knew the truth was creeping into the sugar-coated party. My father, Charles Harper, stood up, straightened his tailored suit, and walked to the podium, where the warm lights illuminated the stage as if to honor a much-anticipated role. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began in a deep, confident voice, It is my great honor to welcome you all to share our family's day. The speech flowed smoothly, as if it had been rehearsed a dozen times, a string of flattering words in praise of Lauren, her early achievements, her unblemished altruism, her bright future with David. He never failed to emphasize the power of family, of loyalty and honor, as if he were the perfect embodiment of those values. But to me, each sentence, so polished, so flowery, so full of lies, only strengthened my resolve. As he finished speaking to a thunderous applause that filled the room, the wedding master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage holding a program card. Next, the maid of honor, and then the best man. I stood up. Actually, I said clearly, I have something to share. The master of ceremonies hesitated, slightly embarrassed. Sorry, Miss Harper isn't on the list of speakers. I looked him straight in the eye, my voice calm but firm. I'm the bride's sister. At the main table, Lauren nodded slightly, and the master of ceremonies stepped back, pointing to the microphone. The room fell silent, everyone's eyes following me as I walked toward the podium, the click of my high heels on the polished wooden floor like a warning drumbeat. My father stood beside the stage, his gaze as cold as a knife that sent shivers down my spine without even needing to be raised. My mother was as still as a statue, her face tense, her hands clasped tightly together in her lap. The Thorntons, Massachusetts political stalwarts, sat in the front row, their stoic exteriors unable to conceal the flicker of confusion in their eyes. I took the microphone, my eyes scanning the room filled with faces who had shared a drink at our house, who had admired my father's so-called perfect family. For those who don't know me, I'm Emily Harper, Lauren's sister. I paused, sensing the movement in the air, the frowns, the questioning glances, the quiet tension of anticipation. Some of you are probably wondering why I've been absent for the past 12 years, and why I haven't appeared at any family events. Whispers began to drift along the tables, like a thin breeze across a lake before a storm. On my 18th birthday, I continued, my father gave me a choice. Either I would remain silent about what I knew, his affairs, the secrets hidden beneath a veneer of honor, or I would leave home and remain silent forever. I looked at him. I chose the truth. A sigh escaped from somewhere in the crowd. That night, I walked out of that mansion with a backpack and $400 in my pocket. I spent my first year in shelters, working as a janitor, a waitress, whatever I could get, and paid my way through community college with 3 jobs. During all those years, no one in the Harper family ever asked if I was alive or dead. Lauren burst into tears, sobs rumbling in her chest, her thin shoulders shaking. David, the groom, held her hand tightly as if trying to hold on to a fragile balance in the midst of the storm that surrounded her. My mother bowed her head, her hands covering her face as if trying to hide the collapse that was happening. My father turned away, urgently signaling Edward Langston, his closest advisor, who had always been by his side like a shadow. I remained where I was, my voice steady and clear like a knife cutting through the glitz. Thanks to strangers who had become my true family and my will to not give up, I graduated from Yale Law School and am now a lawyer at Carter Wells and Associates, specializing in financial crimes. I pulled a brown envelope from my briefcase, and the air in the room seemed to drain away once more. 6 months ago, I said, each word etched into the silence. I was assigned to investigate Northeast Medical for suspected insurance fraud and unnecessary medical interventions. The trail from that investigation led me back here, to Dr. Charles Harper. Someone dropped a wine glass, and the sound of shattering glass echoed in the air as tightly packed as gunpowder. We discovered that he had performed hundreds of unnecessary surgeries, many with serious complications, with at least 10 patients dying as a result of the interventions. All of it was covered up with false records, doctored tests, and payments routed through multiple front companies. The room exploded. Whispers turned to pandemonium, chairs were knocked over, guests were in a frenzy. Councilman Thornton, the groom's father, rose, his face as white as if he had witnessed a political disaster. My father roared, lunging toward me, but David's 2 officer friends quickly blocked his path, preventing him from touching me. I held up the stack of papers in my hands. I have the evidence. Copies of medical records, statements from nurses and technicians who were threatened, bank statements of money transferred to shell companies. My father screamed, his voice a metallic shriek. He's delusional. It's all made up. He just wants revenge. None of it is real. I didn't take my eyes off him. I have all the copies, and the FBI has the originals. They built their own case, completely independent of me. As if to seal my words, the large doors of the banquet hall swung open. Agent Karen Ellis appeared, followed by two plainclothes federal agents. A thick air filled the room. "Charles Harper," she said, her voice ringing like a bell, "you are under arrest on charges of medical fraud, document forgery, and criminal negligence resulting in serious consequences." A wave of chaos swept through the auditorium. People jumped to their feet, phones raised, recording the unprecedented scene. The Thornton family quickly gathered in a circle, and bodyguards stepped forward, tightening the protective formation. My father was handcuffed, struggling wildly in rage and humiliation, screaming for a lawyer. In the midst of the chaos, I saw my mother slumped into a chair, her face buried in her hands. A security guard was calling for an ambulance. I remained at the podium, clutching the microphone, silent as a dark shadow in the rising storm. Lauren pushed her way through the crowd toward me, her white wedding dress fluttering like a bird in the afternoon wind. "What have you done?" she shouted, stepping resolutely onto the altar. "This is my day." But in her sparkling eyes, I saw more than anger. I saw relief, as if a burden had finally fallen from her shoulders. I swallowed, looking straight into her eyes. "You suspected something, didn't you?" Lauren didn't answer right away. She turned away, her gaze fixed on the distance. I had a feeling. What Dad said, there was always something wrong, but I didn't expect it to be this terrible. "Lauren," Councilman Thornton's voice boomed from the back of the chamber. "We must leave immediately." David, her new husband, rushed over, looking tense. My father asked me to cut off all contact immediately, because it would affect the election campaign. Lauren looked at me, then back at David. Her gaze pulled between memory and present, truth and foreshadowed choices. Before she could answer, a nurse approached. "Ms. Harper, your mother wants to see you both." We followed her to a small room away from the noise of the party. My mother, Margaret Harper, lay curled on the sofa, her face pale behind an oxygen mask. She was a shadow of her former self. The cancer had drained her more than I had imagined. When she saw us, she pulled off her mask with trembling hands. "My two daughters," she whispered, "here together, at last." Lauren knelt beside her, her white dress streaking across the cold tile floor. "Mom, don't say anything. Just rest." "No." My mother's voice was suddenly clear. "I had to say it while I still could." She turned to me, her eyes bright with weariness. "Emily, I know. About your father's dark secrets, about the dark money, about the things I should have stopped. Not all of them, but enough to be ashamed of. I hid in alcohol in the role of the perfect wife." Tears fell, rolling down her sunken cheeks. "Why didn't you protect me that night?" She took a ragged breath. "Because I was scared. Your father had it all. The money, the fame, the power. And I was sick even though I hid it. I regret, every day, that I kept quiet." She looked over at Lauren, her thin hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "And you? My perfect daughter. You have become the old version of me, trapped in a velvet cage called appearance." From the hallway, the Thorntons and the waiters could be heard arguing. My mother closed her eyes and whispered, "Be careful with the cage you choose." "Mrs. Harper," a nurse said, her voice gentle but firm, "we need to take you to the hospital for observation." As they were about to move her, she suddenly squeezed my hand, a surprisingly strong squeeze that made me freeze. "The letters," she said softly. "In the silver wooden box, I used to hide the two of you." I had just opened my mouth to ask more when the medical team quickly loaded her into the ambulance, and the door closed immediately after. Lauren and I stood in the small room, motionless shadows amid the echoes of the crash. Through the glass windows, the once bright wedding party was now in chaos. Guests dispersed in confusion, some whispering, others in guarded silence. FBI agents quietly took statements, and my father, Congressman Graham Harper, was led into a federal vehicle surrounded by the flashing lights of cameras like a cold rain of exposed truth. The letter, is it a real letter? Lauren asked, her voice trembling like a stretched thread. I don't know for sure, I replied honestly, but I will find out. The door swung open. David appeared, his face a mixture of tension and confusion. Lauren, my parents want us to leave now. They're considering annulling the engagement to cut costs. Lauren looked down at her wedding ring, the silver cutting through her trust like a knife. She looked at me for a long time, a look as deep as an ancient well, filled with years of unspoken words. Tell them I'll be back. Just a little while. David stood still for a few seconds, then nodded and left. The two of us were alone. Lauren turned to me. 12 years ago, I betrayed you with my silence. I will not allow myself to make that mistake again. She took a deep breath, as if to swallow all her confusion. Are you here for revenge? Or because you still hope to reconnect with me? I replied without beating around the bush. I need justice, but when I saw you, I realized how much I missed you. Lauren nodded. Her eyes were moist, and her wedding makeup was now melting away in the tears. This is not the wedding day I imagined. It was a day of turmoil, political scandals, arrests, family secrets unraveling. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice shaking, for putting you through this today. Don't apologize, she interrupted. Maybe it had to be this way, so there's nothing to hide. Lauren squeezed my hand. There is so much we don't know yet. About Mom, about those letters, and about the road ahead. From the hallway, Councilman Thornton's voice rang out again, urgent like the beat of a drum. Lauren let go of my hand and stood up. I have to talk to David's family. But between us, nothing is over, Emily. She looked at me one last time, her eyes shining through the broken pieces. Tomorrow, we'll talk tomorrow. When Lauren left to face the political storm the Thorntons had stirred up, I sat in the empty room where the silence was suffocating. Emotions rolled in like tides, rising and falling, uncontrollable. The justice I had yearned for 12 years had finally arrived, but it did not bring the euphoria I had imagined. Instead, there was a cold void, hollowed out by the news of my mother's illness, the words never spoken, and the mysterious letters she had only just mentioned. I had returned to expose a system of lies, to overthrow a family that had turned its back on me. But I had not expected to be left out of the truth. Letters never reached, regrets never written, layers of history I had never reached. The perfect family image I had held in my memory was now a shattered illusion. But in the ruins, something else emerged, a fragile but real glimmer of hope. That the truth, however painful, might be the beginning of healing. The next morning, the news media across New England exploded as if an earthquake had struck. From the arrest of the doctor in the middle of the wedding ceremony to the financial scandal that threatened the Thornton family, the headlines were as shocking as the tsunami, sweeping away the political legacy they had worked so hard to build. My name was everywhere, no longer the forgotten daughter, but the lawyer who had helped expose it all. I left the seaside early, trying to avoid the reporters who had already picked up on my trail. Lauren called me as I drove back to Boston. Her voice was hoarse and shaky, as if she had just cried. The Thorntons are in a panic. Father David wants to cut off all ties with our father. They're pressuring to cancel the marriage. And what do you really want? I asked, and I knew. It was probably the first time anyone had ever asked her that. There was a long silence, heavy as the fog that covers the shore. I'm not sure, she said. Everything I believed in, about my family, about my future, was gone in a day. Where are you? I asked. A hotel near the Coastal Golf Club. The honeymoon is officially canceled. Tomorrow, they want me and David to appear at a press conference, to play the role of the ignorant, the shocked, the accusations against Dad. Accusations? I repeated, my voice full of sarcasm. Lauren, you saw the evidence. I know, she whispered, so softly that her voice sounded like it might break. I believe you, and that's what makes it all the harder to accept. She took a deep breath, her breath ragged as if she were trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. Can you come see me? I stopped by my mom's house this morning. She's in the hospital. And I found that silver wooden box she mentioned. 3 hours later, we were sitting across from each other in a quiet apartment in Cambridge. On the coffee table, the silver wooden box lay quietly between us like a buried memory, just unearthed. Lauren looked haggard, her hair disheveled, still wearing the same clothes she had worn the day before. Her wedding ring was missing. You should open it, she said, her eyes glued to the box, never once leaving. Inside were dozens of envelopes, some yellowed with age, tied together with tarnished silver rubber bands. The first set was from Lauren to me, each one postmarked regularly throughout the first year I was gone. The second set was from my mother, handwritten notes that had never been sent. And the third set stunned me. Letters I had written to Lauren. Letters she had never received. I wrote to you every week that first year, I whispered, my throat tightening. Then I stopped writing, when I began to believe you didn't care anymore. I wrote too, Lauren replied, her voice shaking, her eyes red. But the letters just didn't come. I didn't know if I had any hope. We sat there for hours, silently reading each other's and my mother's letters, words that never reached their intended destination. Lauren's letters were filled with apologies, little things that were held back by long silences. Mine were about hard days, small victories that I hoped she would be proud of. Mom's letters revealed a heartbreaking truth. She knew about Dad's affairs and financial misdeeds, about the cancer that had regressed and then silently returned, and about her biggest regret in life, not standing up for me when I needed it. She hid the letters. From both of us, I said, my emotions choking between anger and deep sadness. To make us believe we abandoned each other. Yes. Why? Lauren asked hoarsely, wiping away tears. For control, I replied, each word sharp. He wanted to retain the right to tell this family's story. Lauren nodded slowly, as if the pieces of the past were coming together in her mind. He told me you were unstable, that contacting you would only make things worse. But I tried, I said, gesturing to the pile of letters on the table. We both tried. As night fell, the dim light illuminated the exhaustion on her face. Lauren's phone rang incessantly, a constant stream of calls from Thornton's campaign manager. On the fourth call, she put it on speaker. The man on the other end of the line spoke, urgent and tense. Lauren, you have to be at the councilman's house tomorrow morning to review the press conference. The statement is ready. Your job is to express your surprise and support for David. What if I don't come? She asked, her voice soft but firm. A heavy silence fell. That is not an option. The marriage contract has clear terms of loyalty and public responsibility. If you refuse, the annulment will be immediately carried out, and you will be responsible for the full financial consequences to the campaign. That night, Lauren slept on my living room sofa, and I lay awake, reeling from the shattered fragments of a family that had been torn apart. The justice I had yearned for had finally arrived. My father faced criminal charges, his lifelong reputation in tatters. But the truth behind the letters, buried for years, shattered everything I had believed. Lauren had never turned her back on me. My mother had not been silent. She had been silenced, and now she carried with her regret. The black and white picture I had tried to paint for the past 12 years was now a series of overlapping shades of gray that I had avoided. The next morning, I called to take a day off to attend to a family matter. Michael Wells responded calmly, but with a hint of caution. We understand your situation, but to avoid any conflict of interest regarding the Harper case, the firm is required to formally remove you from its records. This is an administrative process, not a disciplinary action. I understand, I replied, relieved that my job was still intact, at least for now. Lauren emerged from the living room, her face less tired, but her eyes still filled with an unnamed emptiness. Mom just called, she said softly. She's being discharged today. Her cancer treatment has been delayed because of all this. I nodded, then asked, as if afraid to hurt her answer, "Where is she going?" "Probably home," Lauren said. "But all of Dad's assets are frozen for investigation. I'm not sure she can stay there for long." That afternoon, we went to see Mom. Margaret Harper lay on her side in the hospital bed, small and gaunt, but there was a rare brilliance in her eyes, a last flame in the night. "I know you found the letters," she said. Her voice was not exactly relief, but a kind of acceptance, of someone finally facing the inevitable. I sat down beside her, looking into her eyes. "Why did you let it happen?" She closed her eyes for a long moment, swallowing a lifetime of silence, then opened them again, her gaze sad but not evasive. "Your father thought it was the only way, that if you and Lauren continued to communicate, you would only hurt more. I was too weak to protest. I was afraid of losing the last stability I had left." She looked at me, blunt, not pleading but sincere. "I know it's unforgivable, but I'm sorry, really." I took a deep breath, fighting back the lump in my throat. "This will take time," I said, my voice dry with honesty. "And time is running out," Mom said softly, her eyes never leaving mine. "Terminal lung cancer is not something to negotiate." Lauren reached out and squeezed Mom's bony hand. "We're here, Mom, both of your children." Mom squeezed our hands, her hands shaking but her gaze firm. "It's all I want, and all I need." In the weeks that followed, a new rhythm quietly took shape, as if the cracks in our lives were being patched up bit by bit. Lauren moved into my living room, cutting herself off from the Thorntons, a decision that was not easy, given the constant stream of threatening legal letters. My mother was moved to a hospice facility near our Cambridge apartment, where Lauren and I took turns visiting every day, an unspoken ritual that we both maintained. My father remained in federal custody, denied bail because he was considered a flight risk. The media was initially in an uproar. Reporters camped outside my apartment complex, shadowing us every time we visited Mom. The story had all the makings of a headline: healthcare fraud, political scandal, and strife in a family once revered as a model. But Lauren and I stayed quiet. No press releases, no interviews. Instead, we focused on repairing our broken sisterhood and accompanying Mom in her final days. At the office, I was removed from all medical fraud cases, but I was kept on a few cases that did not involve Harper. The FBI launched an independent investigation, erecting a strict legal wall that completely isolated me from the case. A formal lawsuit was filed against my father and his associates, including a clinic assistant and a longtime doctor. Lauren began to face a completely different reality. From the role of daughter-in-law in a prestigious councilman's family, she was now a 30-year-old woman out of work, with the press following her every step. But she did not collapse. With surprising calm, Lauren applied everywhere, finally getting a temporary job at a small art gallery in the city. "I've always dreamed of doing something artistic," she whispered one evening, as the two sisters ate pizza on the living room floor. "But Father said," she continued, her eyes looking far away, "art is unworthy of a Harper." I set the pizza down on the box and looked at her. "What else did he forbid you from pursuing?" Lauren was silent for a long time, as if searching for fragments of a dream that had been covered with dust for too long. "Travel. Not the luxury vacation kind, but real journeys. Friends who come to you not because they are Harper. A relationship based on love, not status." She smiled, a sad, deep smile. "I was the one who stayed," she said softly. "But maybe that's why I was never truly free." A month later, my father asked to see me. Despite my hesitation, I agreed to accompany Lauren to the federal penitentiary. Charles Harper looked visibly haggard in his tattered prison uniform, his once imposing presence a spent shell. As soon as we sat down, he steered the conversation in his direction. "This case is going to be dismissed," he said, not bothering to say hello. "My attorney is moving to exclude evidence illegally planted by a hateful son." "The FBI has an independent investigation," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. But he just waved his hand as if dismissing the nonsense. "I need you to be my witnesses, to prove our family's bond." Lauren and I looked at each other, eyes heavy. "Is that why you called us?" she asked, her voice strained. "Not to apologize, not to explain?" "I have nothing to apologize for," he said, his voice hard. "All I did was for this family." "By hurting my patients?" I asked, unable to hide my anger. "By putting profit before life?" "I built this entire practice so you could have a life of dignity," he said, repeating the same old line. "Medicine is a business, Rebecca. I'm just optimizing for efficiency." "They're dead, Dad," Lauren whispered, as if to herself. "They're not numbers, they're people." His face fell for a moment, as if offended by the truth. Then he shrugged coolly. "Medical complications are common. We have insurance to cover that." We left the visiting room less than 20 minutes later, flatly declining the offer to testify. In the parking lot, Lauren collapsed, tears streaming down her face, sobbing silently. "He still wants to control us. Same. Same." I held her, my voice low but firm. "He won't change, Lauren, but we can." As I drove back into the city, I felt something in my chest begin to lift. A burden that had been weighing me down for 12 years was beginning to fall away. The justice I had longed for was finally being served through transparency. Lauren, the sister I had missed, was back by my side. My mother, the one I had resented, was seeking redemption in her final days. Nothing could erase the past, the years of denial, of conflict, of hurt, of loneliness. But what I didn't expect when I opened that wedding invitation was exactly what I had longed for, a chance to heal. 6 months after Lauren's wedding storm, fall had turned Boston Common a golden yellow, carpeting the leaves beneath the trees visible from my office window. On my desk, next to a pile of files and a cold cup of coffee, was a framed photo of Lauren and me at the Boston Botanical Garden, arms linked, smiling as if the darkness had never passed through our lives. Next to it was my mother's hospice schedule, written in a shaky, affectionate handwriting. The trial of Charles Harper, my former doctor, my father, had been set for February. The prosecutor had woven a case as tight as steel. Detailed financial records, searing testimony from patients, witnesses who had worked under him. The defense tried to cite my initial involvement as evidence, but the judge refused, insisting that the FBI's independent investigation was objective and legitimate, regardless of its source. My father maintained his innocence, even as the evidence piled up to a suffocating degree. His medical license was revoked, his assets were frozen, and the name Charles Harper was reduced to an angry echo. The house in Massachusetts, once a home, now a symbol of brokenness, was in foreclosure. Every item inside was meticulously cataloged and auctioned off to help compensate the patients he had hurt. My mother, Margaret, was in a state of marked decline. The scandal seemed to have extinguished the last glimmer of light in her. Yet in a rare moment of clarity, she looked at me and said that the truth finally being revealed was a form of salvation. "I've lived in gilded cages for too long," she whispered, her eyes on the small window where the light fell on her silver hair. "First the expectations of my family, then the control of your father. I don't fear death, Emily. I only regret not being myself sooner." Mom's lucid moments were becoming increasingly rare, as pain medication was gradually increased to combat the constant exhaustion. Lauren had quit her job at a downtown art gallery and was living mostly in a care facility near Cambridge, where she would fall asleep in a folding chair next to her mother's bed, holding her mother's bony hand, a touch that would soon be forgotten. My career was finally getting back on track after years of tottering. Though I had withdrawn from healthcare fraud cases, my expertise in financial law was still highly regarded in the legal community. Michael Wells, a senior partner, had even suggested that I be considered for promotion to partner at my next review. Your work on Harper showed a remarkable level of sharpness and courage, he said during our performance review. Personally speaking, that investigation was truly impressive. Professor Susan Carter, Susan, as she insisted I call her, became a friend I never thought I would have. She would often stop by my small apartment with a box of homemade food and a quiet, sympathetic gaze, the kind of warm presence I once believed I didn't need. One chilly evening, as the three of us gathered around the simple dining table, Susan looked at us for a long moment and said softly, "You two have come a long way. From girls who once huddled on the docks, you are now two women trying to get justice and mend a broken family." "But not yet," I replied, setting my spoon down on the old china plate. "I am no longer the girl who quietly left Massachusetts 12 years ago. I no longer seek forgiveness the way they do. I want the truth, no matter how cruel it is." On a chilly November morning, the call I had been waiting for and dreading finally came. Lauren's voice broke through a sob, soft and fragile like morning dew melting through the receiver. "Mom is gone. She passed away peacefully in her sleep." 3 days later, the funeral was held in a small, modest, but cozy chapel near the care facility in Cambridge. Despite the Harper's status in Massachusetts society, the number of mourners could be counted on one hand. A few loyal old friends of Mom's, a few distant relatives, Lauren and me, and the group of nurses who had loved Margaret. My father, Charles, was allowed to attend under strict supervision. He wore a dark gray suit instead of prison clothes and was not handcuffed, but 2 federal agents stood by his side, silent as shadows. He looked almost unrecognizable. His once broad shoulders now hunched as if weighed down by winter. His once majestic bearing reduced to the shell of an old lonely man, facing 2 irreparable losses, his freedom and his wife of 35 years. The ceremony was quiet, solemn, and simple. No one tried to make my mother into a perfect model. The farewells were a heartfelt recognition of a multifaceted person, a person who had made mistakes, but in her final years had the courage to seek forgiveness. Lauren spoke of her mother's love of art, the stories she told in her deep kitchen voice, and the unexpected moments of tenderness amid her strict upbringing. I told her of the afternoons she spent patiently teaching me to strum my first chords, the wanderings we spent together in the Boston Public Library, and the exquisite joy she found in the small beauties of everyday life. We did not mention Mom's alcoholism, nor the long silence we had about Dad's behavior. Those things had already been said, privately, with all sincerity, before she closed her eyes for the last time. The service needed no further explanation. After a final prayer, each person approached the casket to say goodbye. When Dad's turn came, he stood still for a long time, his eyes fixed on Mom's serene face. In that fragile moment, his shell seemed to crack, and his true pain was revealed. He placed his hand on the edge of the casket, whispered something only he and Margaret could understand, and quietly let himself be led away by federal agents. Outside the chapel, in the hazy chill of the late afternoon, Dad was allowed a few brief moments to talk to us before he was escorted back to the prison. "I love you," he said, his voice hoarse as if it were coming from the deepest recesses of dusty memory. "Whatever happens." "We know," Lauren replied, her voice light as a breeze, her eyes fixed on his gaunt face. "You told me." He nodded slowly, as if his heavy heart made it difficult for his muscles to move. He looked much older than his 62 years. Older with years, but older still with remorse and unnamed loss. "I want to see you again," he said, his eyes aching for forgiveness that hadn't materialized. "Before the trial," I replied, my eyes flicking to Lauren as if seeking silent approval. "We'll think about it." As the federal agents approached, he turned to look back one last time. "I loved her, in my way." "In your way," I repeated, not harshly but not softly. "That's always the point, isn't it?" After the funeral, Lauren and I walked back to the apartment in silence, 2 weary shadows caught in the middle of something unfinished. We were both exhausted, by grief, by memories as fragmented as broken glass, and by the heavy weight of the Harper name that we had never had a choice in. We sat in silence, each holding a cup of tea that was slowly cooling, our eyes fixed on the windows where the lights of Boston flickered on like thin breaths fighting the encroaching darkness. "What now?" Lauren asked quietly, as if talking to herself. "Keep going," I said, my voice low but firm. "One day at a time." In the weeks after the funeral, Lauren and I began to piece together our lives, bit by bit. She rented a small apartment near my neighborhood in Cambridge, close enough that we could have dinner together several times a week, but far enough away that we could each maintain the space we needed to heal. Lauren began to assert herself at the gallery. For the first time, her deep knowledge of art history was not only recognized, but put to good use. I continued practicing law, but increasingly focused on defending the financially abused elderly. A less glamorous field, but one that felt meaningful and urgent. We returned to our childhood home in Massachusetts one last time before it was auctioned off. Walking through the empty rooms, the place where a childhood had been filled with conflict and silence, was a strange experience, like walking through an old, faded dream. The living room, where spoons once rang out during tense meals, now echoed only with lonely footsteps. The stairs I'd run up during arguments were covered in dust. Lauren's room still had faded blue paint on the walls. My room, as for me, was now empty, as if it had never belonged to anyone. Every trace had been erased since I left. In the corner of my mother's closet, we found a small, locked metal box. Inside were her birth certificate, a few faded black and white photos, and a slim notebook she'd written in over the years. Sitting on the cold wooden floor in the middle of the empty bedroom, we read the pages. The slanted, sometimes confusing but honest lines revealed a quiet, conscious soul. A woman trapped in a marriage more for security than for love, struggling silently with depression through alcohol and avoidance. "I don't think I want to keep any of the furniture or the paintings," Lauren said as we prepared to leave. "Too many memories to carry." "I understand," I nodded. "But if I could, I would like to keep Mom's guitar. It holds some rare moments of peace." The proceeds from the auction went largely to a victims' compensation fund. A small portion went to pay for Mom's end-of-life care. The Harper family fortune, built on deception and maintained through masks of politeness, was eventually unraveled by the law, slowly but irreversibly, piece by piece. February brought cold, snowy weather, and with it the trial of Charles Harper. Lauren and I were present only for the opening and sentencing, away from the harrowing testimony of patients who had endured pointless medical procedures. The evidence was presented with brutal clarity, and the prosecution worked with cold determination. After 7 days of trial and 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict: guilty on all counts. When the verdict was read, the judge spared no time. "Dr. Harper, you betrayed the sacred trust between doctor and patient," he declared, his voice calm but firm. "Your actions were motivated by greed, masked by lies, and resulted in untold needless suffering." The sentence, 16 years in federal prison. Outside the courthouse, reporters jostled, microphones and cameras surrounding us as if our stories were now public knowledge. Lauren stepped forward, her gaze calm but not cold, facing the cameras as if she could see through them all. "Today is a day for consequences, not celebration," she said, her voice clear, each word carefully measured. "No one can call this a victory when those who were supposed to protect us betray our trust. Our deepest condolences to the victims and their families." As the last of the media lights faded, Lauren and I began to write a new chapter. The familiar Saturday dinners at our small apartment in Cambridge, with Professor Susan Carter and a few close friends, the ones who had stayed with us through our darkest days. Gradually, those gatherings became a different kind of family. No longer bound by blood or duty, but bound by honesty, choice, and trust. One spring evening, as the last light of day filtered quietly through the windows, Lauren raised her glass, her eyes shining in the dim light. "For Emily, who was strong enough to walk away and brave enough to come back." Susan smiled, her voice low but full of emotion. "And who chose truth over safety, justice over silence." Then she looked at us, her eyes quiet but determined. "And both of you, for rebuilding from what was broken. this time on a foundation of honesty. That night, after everyone had left, Lauren and I quietly packed up, the space filled with an unforced silence, the quiet of souls who understood each other without much speaking. I used to wonder, would things have been different if I hadn't left that night? She asked, gently drying her glass. A couple of times. I nodded slowly. But I know, if I had stayed, I would never have been myself. Me too, she said, her eyes shining with a soft sadness. I had to lose everything to find myself. Not everything. I put my hand on her shoulder, smiling. You still have me. There was a framed photo on my desk, Lauren and me, leaning against each other in the soft sunlight. A silent testament to the fact that family isn't just about blood, but about those who choose to stay by your side out of truth, not fame or duty. The Harper family as I knew it was gone. That facade of perfection crumbled. My father was convicted. My mother passed away quietly. The ancestral home was gone. Nothing was left. But from the ashes, something more real emerged. A sisterhood bound by trust. A new family built on a foundation of honesty and freedom to live in the light of truth. I still visit my father in the Massachusetts Federal Penitentiary. Our conversations are still filled with silences, as he struggles to confront the mistakes he has made after years of building a strong facade. Still, we try, not perfectly, but sincerely to listen to each other. Some wounds never heal, but acknowledging even a small part is a starting point. The journey from that night, when I left Massachusetts with only $400 in my pocket, to today, 12 years later, has been longer, stranger, and more brutal than I could have ever imagined. Justice doesn't come without cost. It took so much, from me, from Lauren, and from everyone I've ever loved. But along the way, I found my sister again. Not just in blood, but in a bond born of hurt and healing. The truth about the Harper family is no longer a linear story of perpetrator and victim. It's a maze of complicated emotions, betrayals, blind choices, and misplaced loyalties. If I've learned one lesson, it's this. Family secrets eventually come to light. The deeper they're buried, the more they shatter when they do surface. Or maybe the real lesson is this. True family is the one who stays for the truth, not the convenience. Or maybe simply it's this. It's never too late to start over, as long as you dare to walk with the truth. What about you? Have you ever faced a struggle between honesty and loyalty? Have you had to choose between staying silent or standing up? If so, I want to hear. Share your story in the comments. If my journey from being abandoned by my own family to standing up for justice and rebuilding my life from the ashes has resonated with you, please give it a like so it can reach those who need it. Don't forget to follow me, to continue to accompany me through my true stories of trauma, family, and healing. Thank you for being here. Because sometimes the truths that hurt the most are the first doors that open to the deepest healing.